Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, beautiful Danville, Illinois. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And wherever you may be happening to view this broadcast, if you wish to take part, if you would like to make comments or ask questions, please feel free to type on that platform. It will show up in my chat room and I will respond to you. And we will have a lovely midday visit. And I very much enjoy spending this time with you. I hope you're enjoying spending it with me. As you know, I've just moved back to Danville, Illinois, the land of my ancestors, and I'm slowly getting back to normal. In a few days, I will have more of a shooting location and be using my own computer. Currently, I am using unfamiliar equipment, but all is well. Things are moving nicely, and here we are. Last night I did my Patreon chat room. As you know, I've been doing a chat room since 1998. I think it might be. I think it probably is the longest metaphysical chat room that has gone without interruption. And it currently is on my Patreon. It's been on a number of different platforms over the years, but we did that last night, and that went well. Although I was quite exhausted at that point from all of the weekend's activities. But we had a lovely chat, a lovely evening, and things are getting back to normal. And I wanted to talk to you about the future and what you would like to see from me now that my life is reorienting in a different direction. I've talked a lot about being an artist, and of course, you're going to see more artwork from me. You're going to see more books from me. But what else would you like to see? I am planning to begin reading again, and I'm curious to know if people are interested in seeing me as a reader. I've thought about offering seances again. My seances have been popular in the past. I was thinking people might enjoy that. Maybe I should consider doing um, online classes or seminars in the future. Although I certainly do have lots of teaching planned for the future. These are some of the things I'm looking at. I plan to do lots of filming for Pagan World. And so I think I'll be keeping quite busy. But I do have that question: what would you like to see me doing? What is it that you would most be interested in viewing or reading or watching from me? And as I'm developing these things, I'd like to take into account um, what you would like to see. And hello to Jason in the chat room. And Jason is very much in favor of seminars, so we will have to see what we can do with that. I am planning to put up some artwork on my page later today. Hello to Mary in the chat room. I hope you're well today, Mary. Hope everyone is having a lovely day. Here in Danville, it is a bright, sunny day, but the house is nicely cool, and it's quite pleasant. And I always like that. It was a pleasant evening last night. Janet says, and hello to Janet. Janet says, I would like to see a seance and learn from it. I'm sure we're going to schedule some. I have done seances for many years. Hello to Michael in the chat room. I have, oh my goodness. Well, depending on your exact definition of seance, a seance is a sitting for spirits. So I've been doing that since I was quite young. Because, I mean, that's what the entire oracle work of the tradition basically comes down to, sitting for the messages of the ancestors. So, in a manner of speaking, any such session is a seance, but what people normally mean um, is a little different. I've been doing public seances for many years. I've done some that lasted as long as 4 hours. And usually, when I do a seance differs from a clairvoyant reading in that you're generally bringing through specifically a message from a specific spirit. And most commonly, when I do a seance, it will be spirit guides. Um, Sometimes it will be specific ancestors. They're not always ancestors, but they're the spirits who are attached to you, and they will speak. And Jason remarks that the seances at the Gray Elephant and in Salem were amazing. Thank you, Jason. That's very kind of you. And some of them really were quite interesting. At the Gray Elephant in Hoopston, we used to usually do seances in October, in Salem as well. And they, we've done them all kinds of different ways. The truth of the matter is, a seance really can be very straightforward. All that has to happen for a seance is that the person who is bringing through the message sits for the message. Um, I learned to do it basically in a brightly lit kitchen. Most of the seances I've done, most of the oracle work I've done, has always been in company with others, in perfectly ordinary places, usually brightly lit. So that trope that you see of the darkened room and all of the spooky atmosphere, you certainly can do that. But anyone who tells you it's necessary, maybe it's necessary for them, but it isn't really necessary at all. Though I will admit that when you're first learning to do this sort of work, shutting out exterior influences is helpful. And that, in theory, is what the darkened room is all about, which was very much a spiritualist thing. But I usually don't do that sort of thing unless I'm doing it specifically in the context of October and the Halloween season, and when I know people are looking for an experience. Now in Salem, um, actually at the Gray Elephant, now that I think about it, we would do them upstairs, and at one point we had a candlelit chandelier above the reading table, and it was very atmospheric. But in October, that's what people are looking for. But it's not necessary. We have on Magic TV, I believe, a number of videos of seances, and you can see just how straightforward they really are. And hello to Janet from Ohio. Good to see you, Janet. Hello, Bradley. Good to see you. I'm so happy you're all joining me. Um, this really is a lovely thing to do at midday. And we're talking today about things people might like to see from me in the future. We're currently talking about seances. Doing a seance online is not really any different than doing it in person, but it can make a lot of difference to that whole issue of atmosphere. Um, Obviously, ideas of having bright lights or darkening the lights or what have you are not relevant to that situation because we're all in different rooms. Um, and Janet mentions meditation. Yes, it might be nice for me to do some meditations. I'm also looking at maybe doing some of the mini spells that appear in Reverend Don's Super Omnibus in video form as we go forward. There are a lot of things that I may do, but I'm very curious for what people would like to see. Hello to Ivy in the chat room, and Ivy would like to see instruction on house blessings and protection spells. That certainly could be done. Um, we should have some of that at Magic TV, but of course, that doesn't mean we shouldn't redo it. So maybe I will work on that. And Mary says she's very excited. Hello to Patty in the chat room. Good to see you, Patty. Um, and Patty is one of our good friends from Jacksonville, and we love Patty. Um, it one of the great things about the internet is that space is no longer a separation. For a long time, of course, when we worked astrally, space was not a separation. But in the regular world, of course, for most of it, it very much was. Now it really isn't in the way that it formerly was. We can see each other online, we can talk online. In a lot of ways, the distance that was once between us is gone. And this is an amazing development. It really is. And as we move a little further into virtual reality, this will become even more so, as we will begin to have much more of the sensation of meeting in the same room, being in the same place, even being able to touch, which at present is a little beyond what most of us can do, although people are working on it. And some of this already exists, but I fully expect that the internet will, in effect, become and in fact is an extension of our astral experiences. We simply haven't fully realized or harnessed it in that sense yet. And hello to Brenda in the chat room. Good to see you, Brenda. Thank you for helping us the other day. It was good to see you in person. And the world is changing. It's changing exponentially fast. We have artificial intelligence doing all kinds of things now, which will only increase. Hello to Regina in the chat room who says, yes, that is cyberkinesis. Very good word. I must remember it. And yes, absolutely. It As metaphysical people, as spiritual people, we must not be deceived into thinking that the internet is a mundane experience. It is not. It is a metaphysical experience, as is our everyday life. And it's when we forget these things that we lose touch with our higher selves. Hello to Maggie in the chat room. Welcome, Maggie. And Maggie says that she would like to learn how to get the most help from our spirit guides. That so some of these practical considerations are things that people very much want to see. So I will have to make a point of focusing on that. I think I've talked previously that, and Regina says, internet and work is a reality now. Absolutely. Um, and when you stop and think of what we've seen in just these few years, it's amazing because I remember, and being back here in Danville, being back on Virginia Street of all places, does remind me of how far we've come because I remember, I can remember the mimeograph. I can remember when photocopying was the state of the art, when we still used typewriters. I learned to type on a manual typewriter before electric typewriters were the thing. And today we're doing this. And I know that every generation sees a vast amount of change, although each successive generation seems to see more because it is cumulative. An earlier generation went from horse and buggy to landing on the moon. But if you look at every generation in history, the vast majority of them have seen considerable movement during the space of a single human life, but not as much as we're seeing, and not as much as our children will see, because again, it is cumulative. All of these advancements advance everything faster. And hello to Ali Deva in the chat room. Welcome. And as we move forward, I think we're only going to see things continue to speed up and expand. And I think that's quite exciting. It offers us a scope in our lives that we did not have in the same way 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. Um, of course, those of us who are metaphysical did have many of these things in a different way. Hello to Sir Edward in the chat room. But not in this easily physically accessed manner. And again, I see this very much as an extenuation of astral experience. But one of the big differences is that any person can use this without necessarily having to be astrally developed. And I think that learning to become astrally developed will be made easier through this technology. All of us, of course, have an astral level all of the time that's always working. But learning to control it is another matter. I'm a great believer in the idea that magic is a constant for all people, that we all perform magic, we all manifest in every moment we're alive, we're all astrally active in every moment we're alive, but we're usually not conscious of it, we're usually not in full control of it. Learning to do that takes some effort. But I think it will be less effort with the use of this sort of technology. And Regina in the chat room says, you're very good at explaining things. Thank you, Regina. And hello to George in the chat room. It's good to see you, George. George is an old friend of mine I have known since I was 6, I believe. And I'm hoping to see George sometime in the near future. I just, as I was saying earlier, just moved back to this area this weekend, and am still getting acclimated, and it's quite the adventure. When we interact online, if you think about it, years ago when I was very active, hello to Anna in the chat room, very active in the Fellowship of Isis, which I still am active in the Fellowship of Isis. I am, among other things, an Archpriest of Isis, and a Grand Commander in the Noble Order of Tara, and a member of the Triad Union. But back in the day, I was very active in the Chicago Fellowship of Isis. And I remember speaking with Lady Olivia, the co founder of the fellowship, about how they would do, normally, they did initiation by attunement, but they would also, on occasion, involve the telephone. And someone would call the Fellowship of Isis headquarters to do their initiations um, at the same time they were doing them by attunement. And she talked about how on one occasion, the someone had forgotten to pay the phone bill, and the phone went out right before this was supposed to happen. But that was at one time the state of the art, is what we could do. Today, we can all meet together online almost as though we were in one room, and we can have such an immediate experience. And I know that tomorrow it's going to be more so. But for today, it's amazing. I remember when we first had just plain old chat rooms where we typed everything in, and how amazing that was, and how not amazing it seems now that we can do so much more. Um, Sometimes we forget how amazing these things are. And I know that tomorrow we will feel almost as though we are in one room, almost as though we can physically touch. Maybe not even almost. It may be so complete. It may be like the holodeck on Star Trek in how we perceive it. But even then, the question becomes, what will be the next thing after that? It is amazing what keeps happening. And we know from all of human history that it shall. Now, certainly there have been times in history when elements of society have regressed. And that certainly can happen also. But things don't just disappear for the most part. And Regina says phone attunements are a powerful tool. Yes, they are. But I find that the video component helps tremendously. Um, and video and audio between them, people often talk about how much was lost in typing in emails and the like. How you lost the tone of voice, the expression of the face, and therefore could easily misunderstand sometimes what was being said. And I think this is very true. And so I think that these movements forward in technology have helped us tremendously. And speaking of things that I will be doing in the future, I certainly plan to be doing a lot of it like this, where we're speaking together, we're working together. Um, and Janet in the chat room says, "I can remember the party line on our telephone," and I can almost remember the era of party lines. They still existed when I was born, and my father and mother used to talk about them, and I would see them on television. But they had, by the time I was aware of the phone, they had gone the way of all flesh where I lived, but not by very far. And I remember watching an episode of Perry Mason, which I knew was not far before my birth, and Perry Mason was one of my mother's favorite television shows, and actually one of mine. And I was watching this, and there was a scene where Raymond Burr goes to make a phone call in a public phone booth, which, of course, today is a piece of archaeology. But I lived with them for a long time, and in this phone booth is an old-fashioned crank phone that apparently was still in use in like 1956, 1957. That did surprise me. Um, but these technologies, as new ones come in, the old ones don't just disappear necessarily. They're often still here side by side. Um, and Mary in the chat room says things just don't come over the same in text. And this is very true. Mary remarks that she is very animated when she speaks, and this is very true. We lose a lot, I think, when we have those more limited forms of communication. Although I will also say that when we understand how to use them, sometimes those limitations can be a gain. Um, you don't have to worry about your poker face if they can't see your face. Um, you don't have to worry about what you sound like if they only see words. But you must be very conscious of your words. And, that's one of the things people often ask me um, about issues of leadership and presentation. One of the things I learned in my many years um, on this path is to be very careful in writing, particularly official communications, because they can come back to haunt you. People will quote what you have said far more seriously sometimes than you ever meant it. And it's so easy to not think of every variable when you're not trying to think of every variable. And in fact, when you're in a position of leadership, you must. It's not getting those variables, not crossing those T's, not dotting those I's that trip people up. And I certainly can't say that I have been a perfect exemplar of doing that, but I have made an effort over the years. Every time I needed to make a ruling, I was also I was always very careful to make sure that I was being clear and that I was covering every eventuality I could think of, so that people couldn't come back and say, "Well, I misunderstood," or "You acted too hastily." I was always very clear on why certain actions were taken, and I think that one must do that. You can't just be arbitrary. That you must be following the rules, and it's wise to explain exactly what the rules were if they happen to have been violated. Um, to explain why you're taking an action. Um, it can't just be a temper tantrum. It can't be an emotional whim. It must be a sensible, intelligent action with real reasons. Anything else, well, it's not the act of a leader, it's the act of a weak person. Um, but in other parts of life, too, being careful what we say can be very important. People sometimes misunderstand or misconstrue what we say when we thought we were being perfectly clear and they heard something totally different. Although you can't always avoid that because sometimes people hear only what they want to hear. Um, and talking about psychic readings and seances, this happens in that context also. In fact, anyone who's a professional psychic reader can tell you that there are those clients who will hear only what they want to hear, no matter what you tell them, no matter what spirit brings through for them, no matter what cards may say if you're reading cards, they will still find a way to hear what they want to hear. Sometimes breathtakingly different from anything that reading is actually offering them. Most people, thankfully, are not that way, but it does happen. And this happens in life too. I think we all know people who, no matter what you say, they're going to hear what they choose to hear, which may not be remotely what you've said. And that's always an aspect of life. But I find it very wise uh, to therefore be as specific as possible. And I will admit, for example, if you're watching this broadcast or if you're reading, for example, Reverend Don's books of questions, those are in colloquial speech. When I did the vlog for 10 years, I did it just in front of the camera. There may have been research, but there were not scripts. And usually they were subjects that I just already knew. And I would speak about them as I would normally speak. But when I wrote, for example, the degree books, I wrote in a much more thorough style because it was there in front of me to think about. When you read the book of questions, it's coming off the top of my head. And therefore, sometimes I don't cover every aspect of a thing as I might otherwise. But I usually also remark on that the format of the vlog didn't permit covering every aspect of complex situations. But almost any question one might ask in the metaphysical world is going to have a lot of things that can be answered to it if you choose to be exhaustive. And um, that always, in my opinion, is good to follow all of those directions if you can. And again, you don't always have the time to do that. You don't always have the format to do it. But when you can, I think it's good to look at all of the different possibilities. And I always tried to speak to not just how I looked at something, but how others might look at it as well. Because I certainly am aware that the way I look at things is not the only way. And it's vitally important for everyone to remember that this is so, that we all have our own point of view. And particularly in something like metaphysics or philosophy, there are going to be people who have other points of view, and that doesn't necessarily make them wrong. Um, it means they're looking from another angle, they're considering other possibilities, and um, that doesn't make them wrong. That's not to say that no one's ever wrong, um, but just being different is not being wrong. And so when I talked about many subjects in the vlog, I would say, this is my point of view, or this is the Corellian point of view. But if you were a ceremonial, you might look at it this way. Or if you were a spiritualist, you might look at it that way. And these are simply different ways of approaching these matters. And I think that's very important to always keep in mind. And it was great fun doing the vlog all those years. Um, but 10 years is a long time. And I'm looking to focus a lot more on psychic matters in the future, so expect me to talk a lot more about psychic things than I might have in past years. I Not that I haven't talked about that at length on occasion because people ask, but I am looking at focusing a little bit less on theology and a lot more on practicality, the practicalities of magic, the practicalities of psychism, and using them in this world. And Sir Edward says, well, isn't this basically a long form daily vlog? And yes, it is. Um, and so, if you have any questions that you might have asked the vlog, feel free to bring them here. And we do on most days talk about at least one subject in some detail. And we can talk about many. And speaking of the vlog and how it got to be that way, when we started the vlog in 2010, I believe it was, the idea was to follow daily life, but my daily life was kind of boring. Um, Although we did sometimes still follow it, and boring, I suppose, is a relative term. Um, but I found that I was far more comfortable talking to people about their questions and concerns, and that certainly is still true for me. So in this broadcast, if you have questions and concerns, I love to talk about them. I'm hoping to bring you interviews with people both locally and otherwise. For a comparatively small town, and Danville is a town between 30 and 40,000. Um, Danville has a very strong metaphysical community and a number of interesting metaphysical personalities, and still more in nearby Champaign and other outlying areas. So I'm hoping we'll bring you a sampling of that as we go forward. There are 3 metaphysical stores in this area. Perhaps we can do interviews with them. I think that it will be. I think that it will be a fun time, and we will be watching parts of my daily life, but also talking about issues, talking about subjects, and as we go forward, doing things like seminars and seances and instructional pieces. And I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are as well. And with that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. So let us close as we always do with our prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to be with us and to guide us as we go forward. Help us to go forward on the paths we have chosen with wisdom and joy. Help us to find the things that are meant for us in life and to use them to the fullest. Help us to find the people that are meant for us in life and to join with them in love. Beloved ancestors, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, we thank you with great love and with respect. May you be blessed now and always. And I thank you with great love for joining me for Midday with Reverend Don. I hope you join me tomorrow. And until next time, may you be blessed now and always.